Today we're going to make graham cracker crust. Now graham cracker crust basically consists of three ingredients. One is the graham cracker crumbs, one is sugar, and one is butter. Now the graham cracker crumbs can come from either graham crackers that you grind yourself, or you can buy pre-ground graham cracker crumbs. The sugar that you put in is somewhat optional for making the graham cracker crust. There's lots of different things you can make a crumb crust from, but today we're making it with graham crackers. First off, I'm going to add the sugar to the graham cracker crumbs. I'm going to mix that in very well. That way when I start to add the butter, everything is more or less together. Now the sugar is optional. Sometimes I leave it out. Now I'm going to add the butter, and I'm going to hold back a little bit of the butter just to make sure that this recipe is going to hold together. What you're looking for in your graham cracker crust is the crumbs to be wet enough to stick together when you squeeze it in your hand. Do a simple test. Squeeze it in your hand. See, it's kind of falling apart, so I'm going to go ahead and add in the rest of the butter and go ahead and get that blended into the graham cracker crumbs and the sugar. Once I get this incorporated together, I'll give it one more test just to make sure that I've got enough, but not too much butter. You can go too far with the butter and then it just makes a mess. Squeeze it together, holds together nicely. That's a pretty good crust. It's not falling apart. Everything should work out pretty well. We're going to put this into a pie plate. When I start to fill the pie plate with any type of crumb crust, I generally start by putting it in the middle, doing the sides first. So I'm putting the crumbs in the middle of the pie plate. I'm spreading them towards the outside. I concern myself with the outside first because that's what I want to take care of first, just to make sure there's not a lot in that corner. By pressing the crumbs up into the corner of the pie plate, that ensures me that I'm going to have a very thin crust in that corner without it being too thick. Many times, if you just put the graham cracker crumbs into a pie plate and don't press it into that corner very tight, you end up with a great deal of graham cracker crumbs in that corner, and it's just too much to eat. A little bit of the graham cracker crust is fine, but you want to have it fairly thin and consistently as far as its thickness goes throughout the whole thing. I started off by pressing the crumbs up against the side of the plate and the bottom just to make sure that I've got that in there really well, nice and thin. It's not going to be much of an issue. Sometimes you have to add more crumbs to the center, but I think I've probably got enough. I don't see any shiny spots through there. So I'm going to call this good. Now to finish this process, I'm going to take another pie plate. I'm going to press it into the crumbs that are in the first pie plate. And this kind of tightens everything up, gives it a nice appearance. You make sure that that corner gets packed in really well, and that all the crumbs are packed on there really tightly. Okay. Now, there are crumbs around the outside that I'm just going to knock off because these are going to actually fall off anyway. So you might as well go ahead and knock those off because when you go to cut a pie, they're just going to fall off anyway. To finish this graham cracker crust, I put it into a 350-degree oven for about 5 minutes just to dry out the moisture that is in the that was in the butter and the crumbs. That firms up the crust just enough to where it will stay nice and solid and give you a nice slice once you get the pie filled. Chocolate cream pie filling. Today I'm going to be making chocolate cream pie filling. I'm going to be putting this into the graham cracker crust that we have previously made and baked in the oven for about 5 minutes to firm up the crust. Chocolate cream pie filling basically is a pudding. Sometimes it's called a cream pie filling, but basically it's a pudding. Basic ingredients for a pudding are going to be milk, cornstarch, eggs, and chocolate. In the pot, I have 3/4 of the milk that it calls for in the recipe for chocolate cream pie filling. In the bowl, I have about 1/4 of the milk. In that bowl, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dissolve cornstarch in that milk that's in the bowl. While the milk that's on the fire is getting hot, I can get this mixed up and blended together. I used to say the cornstarch gets dissolved in the milk, but it doesn't really dissolve. It just gets suspended within the milk. Most recipes will say to suspend it in the eggs, but it doesn't really break up that much in the egg. Sometimes it's left a little lumpy, so I found it's best to suspend it in the milk first, add the sugar, and then I go ahead and add the eggs last. That way I'm assured that the cornstarch is going to stay in suspension and that it's going to blend into the chocolate cream pie filling nicely without it lumping up. I'm waiting for the milk to come to a boil. Now in the pot there's the milk and the other half the sugar. I'm waiting for that to come up to a boil. This takes a couple of minutes. Ow, that whip's a little warm. Anyway, this takes a little bit of time, so I'm going to stir this until this comes together and starts to come to a full rolling boil. And then we're going to temper the eggs, or temper the hot milk into the eggs. What this means basically is I'm going to take some of the hot milk. I'm going to pour it into the egg mixture to warm them very slowly. So as you can see, the milk is very hot. I'm now going to put the hot milk mixture in with the eggs, cornstarch, and the other half the sugar. And this is going to warm the eggs very slowly. That way I'm not going to have scrambled eggs. Once the eggs have warmed slightly, I'm going to put the milk back on the stove, put it back on the fire. That way it comes back up to a boil. When it comes back up to the boil, I'm going to slowly add in the egg cornstarch mixture into the pot, and then I'm going to continue stirring this mixture until it becomes nice and thick. Now, in order for cornstarch to thicken any type of liquid, this mixture must come to a boil. Usually, if you have eggs and you're trying to thicken something and there's no cornstarch present, you run the risk of basically scrambling the eggs. But because the cornstarch is in this mixture, it stabilizes the eggs enough to where when you bring it to a boil, it will actually hold together and not basically cook the eggs. So I'm just stirring this, keeping everything moving until it gets thick. It takes a few minutes for it to get thick, but once it starts getting thick, pretty much so, it gets thick all at once. You want to keep this mixture moving at all times because if you don't, sometimes you end up with a lumpy filling. The eggs somewhat scramble a little bit on the bottom. The cornstarch thickens up a little bit too much, and it's not a nice smooth mixture. So you need to keep it moving at all times. Once this mixture comes to a boil and you start to see bubbles form on the surface and it starts to kind of pop, that's when you know your mixture is pretty well thickened. It's as hot as it needs to be. Cornstarch, pretty much so, once it reaches a temperature of 195 degrees, will thicken any liquid. Okay, so now it's nice and thick. As you can see, it's got plenty of body behind it now. I'm ready almost to put in the last couple of ingredients that go into this cooked pudding that I've made now. The last two ingredients that get put into this mixture are going to be a little bit of cold raw butter that has been cut into small cubes, and then I'm putting in a little bit of vanilla. If I was to stop right now, this mixture basically would be vanilla pudding. But since I'm making it chocolate, I'm going to go ahead and put in some chocolate. I normally put in about 4 ounces of chocolate chips for one pie. The heat from the mixture is enough to melt those chips down completely, and it will become a nice smooth mixture, uh, have a beautiful chocolatey flavor to it. So once this basically gets melted, meaning the chips are melted, the butter's melted, and it all gets blended together, I'm then going to pour this mixture into my fully baked graham cracker crust. When I pour it into the graham cracker crust and I fill the pie up to the top where I need it to be, I'll go ahead and cover that pie with plastic wrap, with the plastic wrap touching the top of this filling. Whipped cream or Chantilly cream. We're making Chantilly cream today, and Chantilly cream is nothing more than heavy cream that has had powdered sugar added to it to sweeten it, and a little bit of vanilla to give it a little bit of flavor. Right here I have 2 cups of cream, which we're going to use to top our chocolate cream pie with. Um, and then I have some powdered sugar. Uh, to 2 cups of heavy cream, I need 3 ounces of powdered sugar. So I'll go ahead and add that to the bowl. And then I'll go ahead and start whipping this cream, getting it mixed in a little bit at first, and then increasing the speed to actually start whipping the cream. In this whipped cream, you also need a little bit of vanilla. It's about a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon of vanilla, so just add a little bit of vanilla to your whipped cream. It's very important that when you're whipping cream, that your bowl, your whisk, and your cream be very cold. That way, it will be a very stable cream. And you want to whip this on high speed until it reaches a relatively firm peak, but not real stiff. You can over whip cream, and when you over whip cream, it becomes grainy, a little bit lumpy, and it doesn't look very nice. So there's a very fine line between it being whipped to where it will form a nice firm peak and over whipping cream. You have to really start to keep an eye on it when it starts to get a little bit of body behind it, because it goes from that not whipped enough to over whipped very quickly, and it doesn't take very long for that to happen. So right now I'm just going to allow this to whip until it reaches the uh, right consistency to my whipped cream, being very careful not to over whip it. As you can see, it's starting to get a little bit of body behind it, and it's almost where it needs to be. The whipped cream will continue whipping until we get it to the right consistency. Um, Sometimes it takes longer than you think it needs to, but just be patient, keep an eye on it, and then you should end up with a nice whipped cream. Right now, this cream is a little bit on the soft side, but I'm going to stop it here because I think it's got a good consistency for our pie that we're doing today. So go ahead and take the bowl off the machine. Get the machine out of the way, and then we'll go ahead and bring out our pie that we're going to be putting our whipped cream on top of. Now initially when I start to put cream on a cream pie, I'll go ahead and spread the cream all the way across the pie. That way, with each bite of your chocolate cream pie, you're going to get some whipped cream in that same bite too, along with the graham cracker crust. All these mixed together make a wonderful combination. Now, to finish this pie, you could leave it like this, but to finish this pie, give it a little bit more of a finished look to it. I'm going to take the whipped cream that I whipped. I'm going to put it into a pastry bag with a star tip. I'm going to give the pie a little bit more of a nicer look, a little bit more of a finished look to a nice cream pie, uh, just to give it a better appearance. Remember, every time you eat, you always eat with your eyes first. So if it looks good, you're going to think it tastes good because you eat with your eyes first, you eat with your mouth second. That's how you taste things. Now, to do my simple decoration on my cream pie, basically I just take the whipped cream and I'll do circles going towards the inside of the pie. That way it has a nice appearance to it. And then you just turn the pie around and continue doing your little loop-de-loops around and around and around and around. If you have to stop, that's fine. Continue back where you were. So since I'm cutting this pie into 8, I'll go ahead and put 8 rosettes on top of the pie. So you put them across from each other, put the first 4, and then you just put a rosette between. Now to finish this pie off, to give it a beautiful appearance, there's lots of things you can put on top of the pie. I like to put either grated chocolate, you could put cocoa powder on top, you could put chocolate chips, you could actually take chocolate and actually put it through a grater and have kind of a grated chocolate look on top of your pie. So there's lots of different ways you can finish off a chocolate cream pie. I'm going to be using a microplane today with the large block of chocolate. I'm going to just basically just kind of microplane some chocolate a little bit just to kind of give the pie a nice appearance. Like I said, there's lots of different ways you can finish off a pie. This just happens to be one of them. So you'll go ahead and put that on top of the pie. Gives it a nice appearance. A little bit of chocolate. Boom, boom. Okay. Done and done. Now we have a beautiful pie.